The flowers that we're going to find growing in Ohio in the late summer months of July, August, and September are typically going to be found in our grassy fields, in our pastures, in the ditches, and along the woods. Ohio naturally has a woodland habitat. We're a temperate deciduous forest. So when the settlers first came here, there were very few natural open grasslands. There were some natural prairies here in northwest Ohio in the Oak Openings region of Toledo, and also around Killdeer Plains and Big Island wildlife areas. Then down around Darby Creek, we had some larger prairie areas, and just scattered throughout the state. But for the most part, Ohio is forest. There's actually a story that says when the first settlers came here, there were so many trees that a squirrel could jump on a tree in Cincinnati and travel from tree to tree to tree and never touch down until it got to Cleveland. Now, whether that's true or not, who knows, but it does let you know how many forested areas the first settlers encountered when they came here. So as we're looking for our wildflowers in these summer months, we're going to be out here in the fields. Many of these flowers are natural prairie plants or flowers that you would find in some of the openings in our woods, but a lot of them have been introduced from Europe. So whether these flowers were brought here intentionally because the settlers wanted to plant them in their gardens, because they were edible, they were just pretty, or brought here accidentally through seeds that hitched a ride, were part of the hay that was brought along. Either way, they're here now and they grow naturally in our area. Some of these introduced species are simply that, a natural part of our habitat at this point. Others are invasives and can take over an area if they're not careful. So it's important to be able to identify both good and bad plants and flowers to know what you should maintain and what you shouldn't. So let's take a look at some of these plants that we can find out in bloom in the summer. This common orange flower is known as a daylily. It's called a daylily because it'll bloom for one day and is a member of the lily family. Most people don't realize it's only in bloom for a day because there's so many buds on the flower itself, and there's usually so many plants within a colony. Some people call this the common ditch lily because it is very common to see bloomed across Ohio and across the United States. Most parts of this flower are edible. The flower itself can be put into soups to thicken it up like okra would. The buds can be eaten raw, or they can be stir-fried up and served just like you would serve snow peas. The leaves themselves look like grass, and even if you mow them off, a lot of times the flowers will bloom. So that is your common daylily. One of the easiest flowers to identify this time of the year is Queen Anne's lace, otherwise known as wild carrot. It's easy to identify because of the lacy, white, umbel-shaped flower that forms. If you take a close look at it, you can notice that it's made of multiple flowers, and right in the very middle is often an off-colored, usually black, sometimes red flower. Some people say that it's a drop of blood from Queen Anne as she was making her lace and pricked her finger. Other people say that Queen Anne's lace is because the queen used to wear these flowers in her hair. Either way, Queen Anne's lace is simply a wild carrot. If you would let your common garden carrots go to seed, the second year, as carrots are biennials, they take 2 years to produce seed. The first year, you get the carrot, which we usually pick, but if you would let that stay in your garden and go to seed, you would end up with Queen Anne's lace. So if we find this plant in its first year, we can actually dig up the root and consume it. It's not going to be pretty and orange like what you're used to, but it is going to taste like carrots and can be eaten raw or cooked. As the flower dies, the seed pod forms, and this is often called a bird's nest. Birds don't nest in it, but you'll get this cup-shaped. It'll turn brown later in the year. You can see the seeds forming on it, and that's why they call it a bird's nest. So there is your Queen Anne's lace or your wild carrot. Same plant, two different names. Purple coneflower is a common native prairie plant that is very beneficial for butterflies. It's easy to identify because it has a cone-shaped seed head. When the flowers first bloom, you'll notice that they're fairly flat. Purple petals, flat composite seed area. But as they get older and bloom later into the year, they take on a distinct cone-shaped, pine cone-shaped shape. Once they lose those petals, that's where the seeds are going to come from. Also easy to identify because the leaves are very rough and the stem is very rough. Now, coneflower's scientific name is Echinacea purpurea. Echinacea is what many of you may take in order to ward off a cold. So this plant has been used over the years as an herbal supplement to help fight the common cold. There are other types of coneflowers that can be found in our fields and in our prairie areas. There are a lot of different species with different names, but they all have that same general shape where the seed is going to develop that's going to look like a little pine cone. The leaves are going to look slightly different, maybe not quite as rough as the purple coneflower, but they're all beneficial to bees and to butterflies, and a lot of the finches like to enjoy the seeds in the fall, a good source of food for finches. So this is just another species of coneflower that you can find. If you've ever had to weed this flower out of a garden or a flower bed, you probably know its name. This is ironweed, and the name explains how tough the stem actually is. Depending on the soil type, ironweed can reach 10 feet in height. Typically, though, you're going to find it anywhere from 2 to 5 feet. There are dark purple flowers on the top, and then the stem with leaves coming alternately off of it that is often purplishy or reddish in color. Very beneficial for butterflies and bees. I caught this plant a little beyond its prime bloom period, but if you look closely, you'll notice that there are little white flowers, but what's more distinct are the red stems, the branched appearance of the plant, and when I take and I break a leaf off, you'll notice that there's a milky white sap that comes out of it, similar to what you find in a dandelion or a milkweed. This is not a milkweed. It'll grow sometimes right next to milkweeds, but is what we call dogbane. Anything with the word bane in it usually means poison, and so Indians actually used to use this plant to make a poison to try to kill intestinal worms in their dogs. Didn't work real well, but the name stuck around. Another name for this plant is Indian hemp. And it's called Indian hemp because later in the season, as the plant begins to die, you can take the stem and you can make fiber and rope from it. I've done it before. It's not too tough to do. You separate the fibers, roll them out, and you're able to braid a pretty good rope from it. The seed pods are pretty easy to identify on this plant also. Long and skinny like little green beans. So again, this is your dogbane or Indian hemp. This spiny looking plant is not a thistle. It's known as teasel. It's called teasel because shepherds used to tease wool with it. What I mean is they used to take the seed head here and use it to brush out or to card wool in order to bring the fibers together so it could be spun into yarn, which could later be made into sweaters and blankets. It was brought here and is now naturalized. The plant takes 2 years to grow. It's a biennial. The first year, there'll simply be a basal rosette of leaves real close to the ground. The second year, it shoots up this spiny looking plant and will bloom. The flower on teasel is usually purple. Sometimes they can be whitish in color. What's unique about the bloom on it is the flower actually starts to bloom in the middle of the seed head and then move both up and down. So this flower right here is actually in full bloom right now. It'll die from the middle out, and the top and the bottom will be the last ones to finish blooming. This one hasn't bloomed yet, and then these are finished. Where you most often see teasel now is going to be in flower arrangements and crafts, because that's usually what people use it for. Of all the yellow flowers in bloom right now, Wingstem is probably one of the easier ones to identify. And it's called Wingstem because it has wings on its stem. Now let's take a look at the flower first. You'll notice that the flower itself is kind of sickly looking. Actually, there's only a few petals. A lot of times they're kind of droopy and they themselves look like wings. But it's when we look close at the actual stem of the plant, you can see that the stem has basically a leaf all along the edge of it. These are what we call the wings. So this is wingstem. one of the many yellow flowers we have this time of the year. Here's a better close-up look of a wingstem that has a slightly more pronounced wings found on the edge of the stem. There are many species of goldenrods that bloom in the fall. So many species, I'm not going to get into the different types. Sometimes the only way you can tell them apart is looking to see if they have hairs on their stem or looking to see what the flower pattern is. Simply knowing that these plants with golden flowers on them are goldenrod is usually good enough for most people. Most people think that they're allergic to goldenrod. You can't be allergic to goldenrod as it is insect pollinated. And you can even see on this plant there's a lot of little beetles that are going around pollinating it. And you'll see a lot of bees also on these plants. The problem is goldenrod blooms the same time and begins to bloom the same time that ragweed blooms. Ragweed is what people are allergic to if they have hay fever. You can actually see in the back of this goldenrod patch, that taller plant there in the middle is ragweed. And so ragweed has a very indistinct flower. It's green in color, and ragweed is wind pollinated. So that's what you'll be allergic to, not the goldenrod. Here's a close-up of the ragweed. There are two types of ragweed that are common in Ohio. There's the giant ragweed and the common ragweed. You can see the flower is not really something you would even call a flower. It blooms green. The leaf on the giant ragweed kind of looks like a dinosaur's foot, and giant ragweed can get up to 12 feet tall. Common ragweed has more of a ferny appearance on its leaf, but the flowers are going to be similar. So this is something that is going to be pollinated by the wind, and if you are allergic to pollen, this is what's going to affect your hay fever. Here's a giant ragweed that's a little more in bloom than the last one. You can see as you look close, the flower heads, and then as you back away from it, the leaves that definitely look like dinosaur feet. That's what's floating around in the air making you sneeze right now. This is common ragweed. It has a more ferny looking leaf, but you can see that the flower heads are similar. So there's your giant ragweed with the dinosaur foot, and your common ragweed, which gets a lot shorter with the more ferny looking leaf. Both of them are what you're going to be allergic to and not the goldenrod.